Welcome back, everyone. So, I have a question to start for our next lecture here, and it's a basic what if. And this is going to get us to our pretty important topic this semester, but it's a nice way to think about it. What if you were born in the year 500 BC? Not only if you were born in the year 500 BC, but let's say you lived 100 years and you died in the year 400 BC. How would your life have changed in that 100-year period? And what I mean by that is how you work, how you commute, how you live your life. And the answer is, as you're thinking about this, probably nothing. What if you were born in the year 1500 AD and lived 100 years? How would your life have changed? And again, you lived till 1600 AD, sure, some things develop, but again, probably day to day, not much. Now, what if you were born in 1869, specifically May of 1869 AD, and you lived 100 years till about July of 1969 AD? How would your life have changed? And if you stop and you think about that 100-year period, it's ridiculously dramatic, right? I picked those days, May 1869 and July 1969, because of what happens. July 1969, maybe some of you recognize, that's the moon landing. May of 1869, that was right before the Intercontinental Railroad was completed, which means the day you were born, to get across the United States would still be on wagons and it would take you months, and the day you died, you saw man landing on the moon. So that's pretty dramatic, right? And if you think of everything else that changes in that 100-year period, it is shocking how much changes in that 100-year period. And that all has to do with this idea of one key event that we're going to spend, these lectures on, and that's, of course, the Industrial Revolution, right? There are very few events in history that are more important than the Industrial Revolution. We're going to go about the causes, the impacts of the Industrial Revolution. You have the years there. Technically, we say the Industrial Revolution is from 1815 to 1875 in Europe. If you study U.S. history, it's a little bit later. But reality, the Industrial Revolution, kind of like the Scientific Revolution, never ends. It's still going on today. So we're going to go through why the Industrial Revolution happened. We're going to talk about the impacts. And one of the other, that's going to be the big objective of the lecture today. What are the causes? What are the impacts? But one of the other points that I really want to start getting in your head, because this is going to come up much more, a little bit now, even more so after the midterm. And you do have your midterm coming up, by the way. So make sure you're studying those IDs and your essays. Again, remember, your exams are timed, right? It's probably a good time for remind you this, that yeah, yes, it's open notes and open books, but I give you the same amount of time that I give my students in their traditional classes, and I give you the same things you got to do. So you do have open notes. That's a big advantage. Where it could be a little bit of a trap is it's like, oh, I have all my notes. I don't really have to spend the time learning it. And then you're trying to find out. You don't know which IDs I'm going to ask. You don't know which essay I'm going to ask. It's all going to be random. I'm going to pick one of those four essays. Actually, Canvas is going to pick it. It's all randomized. It's going to pick 8 random IDs. And so you need to really be prepared so you're ready on the day of the exam. So just, something to think about. All right, anyways. So part of the theme that I was about to say that we're going to get into is also how optimistic people are going to be by the end of this period of the Industrial Revolution. And it's not just the Industrial Revolution. There are other really big events happening in the 19th century. Sometimes the 19th century is kind of the forgotten century, but you have the Industrial Revolution, you have colonization, you have unification of Italy and Germany. You have the progressive years. Some of the stuff we're going to talk about before the midterm, some after the midterm. If you're living in Western Europe or the United States, by the time you get to the turn of the century, about the year 1900 AD, you're living in one of the most optimistic times in history. Now, if you're living in an area that's being colonized, not so much, right? If you're in Asia and Africa being colonized during this time, it's not too optimistic. But from the Western civilization era, this is like anything you want to accomplish can be accomplished. And I want to stress this now because it's going to become important later after the midterm. All right, so there are a lot of causes of the Industrial Revolution. We're going to go through all of them, and I'm going to start with one that actually a lot of students don't think about. So the first cause of the Industrial Revolution, so there's causes and their impacts. This is a pretty straightforward lecture. There is one thing that kind of does get a little complicated, which is something a cause or an impact? And some things are causes, why the Industrial Revolution happens, and some things are impacts, right? Things occur because of the Industrial Revolution. And a couple things are both, and I'll give you a good example of that as we go through our story. So, I don't know how well you could see this chart. I'll try to explain it to you. I had to play a few times to try to get it in there well so you could see it. So I've been working on it. If it's not clear, actually, I'll need to know so I could try to adjust it for next time. But anyways, so what you have here is the first cause of the Industrial Revolution. When I say political stability. And I'm hoping you can see this. These are countries, Great Britain, Belgium, US, France, all the way down here, and these are dates, right? And the bigger the number, the more industrialization is taking place. Now, what you see is the country that's way ahead is Great Britain. Why is Great Britain so far ahead of everybody else during the Industrial Revolution years? Well, it's primarily because they have a lot of political stability. Remember in France, they went through, the French Revolution and then Napoleon. Notice the entire Industrial Revolution starts 1815. That's right after the Napoleonic Wars. Not a coincidence. You have more stability. Look at the U.S. The U.S. is kind of behind. And in the 1860s, when England is really industrializing, we're not. And there's a reason for that. What's going on in the U.S. at the time? This little thing called the U.S. Civil War, right? And so we're fighting each other. We're not able to grow. Now, once the U.S. Civil War ends, look at what happens. We skyrocket and we pass everyone because we have everything you need in a society to industrialize well. We have like the jackpot of it. We won the lottery of it. The one thing we needed was the political stability. Once we had that, we're able to achieve a lot more. Notice somewhere like China, and you notice the numbers are actually going down. And there's a reason for that. We'll touch on that a little bit later, but that's because the politics in China is a mess in the late 1800s, early 1900s, right? We'll discuss that a little bit later after the midterm, actually. So you definitely see political stability as being one of the core causes of industrial revolution. If you have political stability, it's easier to industrialize, right? So obviously be able not just to say political stability, explain that. So explain those details I just said. This is another one of your possible essay questions. What are the causes and what are the impacts of the industrial revolution? So anyways, that's something I kind of keep in mind as we go through it. All right, next. All right, so here's some other causes of the Industrial Revolution, and we'll just kind of go through, stay on this slide as we go through these other key events or factors that help the Industrial Revolution take place. So one of the things is natural resources, and by that I mean things like iron and coal. Those are two really important ones. There are other natural resources, lumber, obviously, other metals, but having that is going to help the Industrial Revolution. So England had a lot of that. That's one of the reasons they're ahead of the game. They have a lot of natural resources there, a lot of colonies that provide them natural resources as well. Human resources, simply meaning more people, more workers. One of the things we had talked about in life in the 1700s, if you remember, is the population was going up. And by the time we get to the late 1700s, early 1800s, the population of Europe basically doubled. So that means more workers, you could create more stuff. In England, they had an all extra dose of workers because of what happened right next to them, of course, the Irish potato famine. Assuming you're familiar with this, but Ireland, like everybody else, had a massive population growth. Just to put up a couple numbers here, from 1781 to 1845, the population of Ireland doubled, right? Like everybody else. It went from 4 million to 8 million. But then in 1845, you had the potato famine, and it went whoosh down to 6 million. Why? Well, about half the people died, and the other half left. They couldn't survive in Ireland. Where did they go? Well, a lot went to England. A lot went to the United States, right? And so they went to all of these different places to kind of, help those areas to industrialize. So maybe not so good for Ireland, but if you're living in the U.S. or England, you have another group of workers. So that's a factor. Another cause, and I just abbreviated there, is the role of government, right? And what I mean by that, what role did government have to help the industrialization take place? Well, one is patents. And I'm assuming you're all familiar with what a patent is. So governments institute patents really easily. And a patent is basically a copyright on your invention. If you come up with something, it's yours. You can make money off of it. And so that encourages people to come up with more stuff, right? Because I know I can become wealthy from it. Two is subsidies. What are subsidies? That's when government just gives money to industries. Here, take a whole bunch of money and, develop something. The railroad industries, which we'll talk about in a little while, were heavily subsidized by the government. Here, take money, build up, right? And the idea is, why would the government do that? Because that fuels the industrialization. So, you're kind of, succeeding as a nation to industrialize. But the third and most important thing government did to help the industrial revolution take place, and this is what you have to remember, is do nothing. That's this term laissez-faire. So remember, I keep saying we're going to come back to those Enlightenment ideas. Well, remember Adam Smith. I'll just kind of put him up here again. And Adam Smith, you should already have this in your notes, wrote Wealth of Nations. If you don't, make sure you write it down again. And Adam Smith, had this idea that later becomes known as laissez-faire, or before, I forget the exact timing when the term was coined, but it's to do nothing. And he said, the less government does, the better. And government didn't do much, and they didn't regulate businesses. And this allowed industrialization to flourish in Western civilization. This was true in Europe, it was true in the United States. So that's a very positive thing. Now, will there be negative impacts of this as well? Yes, and we're going to explain that later on. When we get to the impacts, I'm going to tell you what are the positive impacts and what are the negative impacts of the Industrial Revolution. And you do want to know both, right? If you're writing your essay and all you do is talk about the positive impacts, I'm going to say, where are the negative ones? If you did all the negative ones, I'm going to say, where are the positive ones, right? So you want to explain both. But definitely limited government, that helps. The next point there is simply competition. And, what do I mean by that? Competition produces excellence, right? If you ever play a game or whatever it is, you're shooting hoops or whatever you do, and you do it by yourself, and then somebody challenges you, all of a sudden you're much more focused, right? And if you're living in Europe and you see England industrializing and everybody, you might be thinking, I better do this too, especially after the Napoleonic period and you just had a guy just run right through Europe in a snap of a finger. If you're not strong, you're going to be thinking, I'm going to be eaten up next. And so the competition between nations, the competition within a nation, right? That helps fuel the Industrial Revolution. So you have that as well. So, just kind of human nature, that element of it too. So that's a cause. And again, when you do these, when you explain these on the exam, don't just list them, explain them, right? And then inventions. Now, there are some inventions, this is where it gets a little tricky. Some things are causes, some are impacts. So the inventions, there are inventions that are causes of the Industrial Revolution, and then there'll be inventions that are impacts of the Industrial Revolution. So one example that's a cause is James Watt. And I kind of group him with the causes primarily because of when he did what he did. He was in the 1700s, right? 1739 to 1819. You don't need to memorize the dates. He's from Scotland, and what you do want to know is what he invents, and that's, of course, the steam engine. So definitely jot that down. And why is the steam engine important? Well, the steam engine is important because it's a power source. And again, the more specific you could be, the better as you're listening and you're taking notes. What kind of power source is the steam engine going to be used for? Well, coal production, iron production, food production, right? Travel, the steam engine, right? So trains and boats, right? So you can move goods faster. You can create things faster. You can create food, flour mills. All of these things are going to be able to develop a lot better because of James Watt's invention, the steam engine. So he's kind of in the late 1700s, early 1800s. So he kind of technically predates what we think of as the quote-unquote Industrial Revolution. Some people kind of date the Industrial Revolution to his time. Other people start a little bit later. But it's definitely one of the key factors as to why the Industrial Revolution takes place. So you definitely want to know James Watt in that. The next cause of the Industrial Revolution is a little bit more complicated, so it gets its own little slide, and that is, of course, the story of the railroad. Now, the railroad is both a cause and an impact of the Industrial Revolution. So let me explain this and kind of walk you through this and these other two names you see here and why they're so important for the Industrial Revolution. So in the early 1800s, you had trains. The problem with trains is in the early 1800s, these train tracks that you see here were always made of metal, but the metal was weak. The metal might break. The other problem you had is the early trains were not this long. The early trains might only have 4 or 5 cars to them. And the reason is this. They couldn't go fast, the trains. The train in the early 1800s might go 15, 20 miles per hour, right? So kind of think about that, right? 15 to 20 miles per hour. That's not very fast, right? And they had to be short. They couldn't be long trains. Why did they have to be short? Why couldn't they go fast? Well, if you go too fast, the metal shatters. If you make them too long, initially to stop a train, it's not like today. You actually had to have a little kind of engineer guy on every single car, and each one of them had to stop his car at the same time. And if one guy was a little bit slow, you can imagine what happens. You're going to get a pile up within the train. So it was very difficult to make effective use of trains. However, the Industrial Revolution changes that, right? One of the impacts, all right, so this is the first impact, all right, I want to make sure this is clear, of the Industrial Revolution is the railroad industry flourishes. Why? Well, think of the things you need. You need raw materials. We have more raw materials now. You need workers. We have more workers now. You need inventions. Well, we have two inventors. You need to know both of them. These are key people that allowed the railroad industry to take place. So these two kind of fall under the causes of the Industrial Revolution and specifically connected to the railroad industry. So a man named Henry Bessemer, I don't know if you've heard of him before, but he developed something called the Bessemer process. He lived in England, 1800s. And what is the Bessemer process? Well, what he discovered is a way to take iron and make it into steel in a much better way. Before Bessemer, we were able to change iron to steel, but it was very expensive and it took a long time. To give you perspective, right, if you look at a metal train track, right, one long rail, before Bessemer, to take that much iron and make it into steel, one long rail of train like that, would take 2 weeks. Bessemer discovered what is called the Bessemer process, where he figured out if you take this iron, heat it up white hot, blow cold air on it right away, it burns off the impurities and makes it into steel. He was able to get the time down. You ready for this? This is mind-blowing. From 2 weeks to the equivalent amount of steel to 15 minutes, right? So what took 2 weeks to create, Bessemer was able to reduce that to 15 minutes. So now we usher in the steel age. And now that you can create steel in massive amounts, that solves one of your problems. Now you have plenty of steel, you could create massive rail lines everywhere that are strong and solid. Now you use the steel for other things, for buildings, for ships, for infrastructure, for skyscrapers. So Bessemer goes way beyond importance for the railroad industry. That's one of the things, but way beyond that. So you have that. Then you have to have these trains stop. And so there was an American named George Westinghouse, invented a lot of things. The one thing we want to note for our purposes, he invents the air brakes. And with the air brakes, one conductor guy can basically stop all of these trains at the same time, all these cars at the same time. So, go as fast as you want, as fast as, the technology at the time would allow you. So by the time we get to the late 1800s, as a result of Bessemer and Westinghouse, one of the impacts of the Industrial Revolution is the railroad industry flourishes. Instead of trains going 15, 20 miles per hour and being short, they're going 60, 70 miles per hour, and they could be as massive and as long as you want almost. Now, that's vital. Why is that vital? Because, this is where you have to follow, then that railroad industry also becomes a further cause of the Industrial Revolution. So it's an impact, but then it becomes cause. How is the railroad industry itself a cause? Well, if I can move, these trains that fast and that long, think of the things I could do. Look, before the railroad industry, if I want to move lumber, and I want to move lumber from a forest area to an urban area, how do I do that before I have railroads? I get my horses, I get a wagon, I chop down some trees, I put them on there, and I move them across, right? Well, that's fine and dandy. How much lumber can a bunch of horses move? Right? You can use your imagination. How much lumber in the same time can a massive train moving 80, 70, 80 miles per hour move? And it's like exponentially more. And so that's what allows the Industrial Revolution to flourish even faster now. We're beyond steam engines and all that. Now we're just moving things so quickly from point A to point B that you have this massive impact on the Industrial Revolution. So this is why I say the railroad is both a cause and an impact. So I hope all that's clear. That's the kind of only tricky part, I think, this lecture. If you understand that, the rest of it's going to be pretty straightforward. All right, so that's why the Industrial Revolution happens. Obviously, it's going to begin to change everything about society. So now we're going to start getting into the impacts of the Industrial Revolution. So let's start with this, what I call topography, right? What do I mean by that? Well, topography is just basically how the land looks, the lay of the land. And the Industrial Revolution changes the lay of the land dramatically. And to really illustrate this, the best thing to do is show you some graphs and image. So I'm going to pop up some graphs and image, and I'll show you what I mean by the topography changing. Okay? So here's the first one. And what you're looking at is all these little dots, and you see 1800 AD, and look at the one on the left, and every one of these little dots is a city that represents 100,000 people. 1900 AD, same thing. Every little dot is a city of at least 100,000 people. Notice the difference. I mean, just look at England alone, right? England alone here, Great Britain, has more in 1900 AD than I think all of Europe does in 1800 AD. And some of these cities are not 100,000, they're hundreds of thousands. So this is what I mean by the topography changing, moving from more a rural to an urban environment. So that's an example. Here's another one. This is population density. And what you're seeing is inhabitants per square mile. And here on the left, you see this image. And this is 1820. You don't see the date there, but it's 1820. It's before the Industrial Revolution. I'm sorry, I got it mixed up. Okay. So here on the right is 1820. This is before the Industrial Revolution, right? And the greens is 20 to 50 people per square mile. So just imagine 20 people spread out over a square mile. So if Cypress College is much smaller than a square mile. So if you imagine Cypress College smaller than Cypress College, 20 people, that's how widespread they were. That's not very densely populated. The 50 to 100 and 100 plus, which you don't see here on this graphic, those are people that the dark browns per square mile. So on the right, you see before the Industrial Revolution. On the left, you see after the Industrial Revolution. And so you could see much more densely populated areas as a result of the Industrial Revolution. People living right on top of each other. And again, it's because we're moving from more rural to more urban. We've seen a shift like this before. During the Renaissance, we saw a little shift from rural to urban. During life in the 1700s, the Enclosure Acts, we saw a little bit of shift from rural to urban. But this is the biggest shift from rural to urban. So you have that as well. Here's a great image that really captures this well. Look at this. This is the intersection. This is later on, but it still makes the point. Wilshire and Santa Monica. The image on the top is Wilshire and Santa Monica in 1924. The image on the bottom is the same intersection in 1954. I just found this in an old magazine and scanned it once and just kind of use it in my lectures now. But it's really amazing. Can you imagine plopping somebody down here in the center of this thing in 1924, and let's say they came from the 1700s and said, hey, here, look at this, and in 30 years all this develops. This is unbelievable. But that's what I mean by the topography changing from rural to urban, right? That's a really good example. So these are all really good images that really capture that. This is a very fascinating photo that also shows you the rural to urban shift. And what this is a picture of the Earth at night. And think about this. Before the Industrial Revolution, if I had a time machine and a satellite, and I were to take this picture at night before the Industrial Revolution, you wouldn't see anything, right? You wouldn't see any lights. After the Industrial Revolution, you see all these city lights, right? Because one of the impacts of the Industrial Revolution, of course, is going to be advent of electricity. We're going to see that later on. But you also see these massive cities growing. And you could see the cities all over Europe. If you get a chance to Google this and kind of zoom into it really well, it's really astonishing what you could see on this map. You see, like, it's probably hard on this, but you could actually see the big cities. You see, like, where Paris is. You see a blob of lights where London is. You see areas where, like, in the United States, the east coast of the United States is more lit up than the west coast, and that's because we started from the United States first. You see, a lot of different things on this map that are really interesting. There's here you see some geography issues. Like here you have a lot of lights in India, and then they stop. That's because of the Himalayas. This over here, that little string of lights there that you might be able to see there, is the Nile River, because everyone still lives along the Nile River. One thing that I always like pointing out, this has nothing to do with the Industrial Revolution, but it's just fascinating. If you look over here, You see these blob of lights. Here is Japan, and here there's a blob of lights, and I don't know how well you could see this. I'm hoping you could see this well. But you see how the lights just kind of stop, and people look at that and go, oh, that looks like an island. Guys, that's not an island. Where you see here a lot of lights, and then there's this darkness over here, that's Korea. That is the North and South Korean peninsula, the Korean peninsula, and that's North and South Korea. Where you see the lights, that's South Korea. We see the darkness, both figuratively and literally, is North Korea. It stops right there on the 38th parallel. I mean, if you want to know the difference between a free, democratic, capitalist society and a communist, socialist dictatorship, that image is one of the most powerful images I have ever seen. It's the same people, same culture, same history. They're just divided along political lines, and the South is flourishing, and the North is just living in absolute darkness, right? And so it's a very powerful image if you can go and find it. But anyways, this is one of those kind of rural, the point of the topography change. All right, one last thing here to show you on this is urban-rural. Now, this is an interesting map. I don't know if any of you have seen this map before. This is an election map. And you go, what? What are you talking about? This is an election map. When I see election map, I see, red states and I see blue states. What are you talking about here? Well, this is an election map, but it's by county by county. And I pulled one from a recent election. I think this one was from like 4 or 8 years ago. And you could do this for any election. You're going to see the same thing for pretty much any election in the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Where if you look at the map and you look at the counties, it's all red. And if I were to tell you, no, red was Republican and blue is Democrat, and you'd say, who won these elections? And you'd go, well, red won by a lot, right? If you look at the last election, any election you can look at, from Bush to Trump to whatever future elections we're having, you're going to have, Clinton, Obama, even in elections that the Democrats win versus the Republicans win, the maps are red. And you go, I don't get it. In some elections, how is it possible that the map is county by county red, even if a Democrat won? Well, this is the deal, guys. The reason the map looks like it, we're pretty much a very split country, right? And what you see is the rural counties are more conservative, right? The urban counties, the centers, the city centers, are more liberal, and so of the left. And so what you have is a lot of rural areas. They are not densely populated. They have a lot of land, right? But they don't have a lot of people in them. And you have the urban areas, which are densely populated. And therefore, if you look at how our elections are, very often they're very close, 50-50 or very near that, right? The reason is even though the map looks entirely red, it's that the urban areas are densely populated, the rural areas not, and you can see the kind of the difference between rural and urban. Now, are some of these counties very close? Yeah, there are some counties that are like 49% to 51%, but you definitely see an overall pattern where rural areas are more conservative, urban areas are more of the left perspective. And it's actually, guys, why we have the electoral college system. I want you to think for a second, if we didn't have the electoral college system, what that would mean. It would mean that a few cities, LA, New York, right, a few of these urban cities would basically dominate the entire country. Now, if you agree with those politics, you'd go, great, what do I care? Well, and if you disagree, go, oh, I hate that. It's not about that. And what happens is this: if a few urban cities are dominating the entire nation, what happens after a generation to people living in these swabs of red counties? Even in areas that have some blue, but still live. After a while, those red counties are going to get very fed up, and you're going to have a mess. And our founding fathers realized that. It was one of the reasons we have the electoral college system. It was to protect some of the smaller states, to protect the rural areas, to make sure a few urban elites don't dominate things. It was to create that balance, to force politicians to care about everyone in the country. If you don't care at all about the urban areas, you're going to have a problem. If you don't care at all about the rural areas, you're going to have a problem. So it was actually very brilliant. A lot of people don't understand it, but it was actually a very brilliant creation. All right, so that's the topography. That's some of the impacts of the Industrial Revolution. Now, there are many other impacts of the Industrial Revolution beyond topography, and we'll get to those in our next lecture. We'll talk about some of those. the life impacts. We'll talk about some of the positive impacts and negative impacts. And so we'll kind of continue on this in the next lecture. All right. Thank you, everyone.